Welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram. We want to thank our sponsor, as always, Wisconsin Civil Liberties Union, for having faith and confidence in what it is we're attempting to do with What's Going On with Earl Ingram. Always excited about mentioning their name um, and them being a part of the show. But it's that time again that I welcome back my good friend and colleague, none other than Mr. Sandy Williams, who is an attorney, an economist. And I don't think I'll go any further because it's, you know, once I start going down that list of all the accomplishments of my good friend,
Well, I'm
it's going to
worried.
take.
I'm worried where you'll get to with that list.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's
going
a
to
good
take.
place to
It's
start.
going to take forever. But good morning to you, my friend. How you doing?
Doing well. Doing well. Spring is trying to come out here. It peaks out and then it hides again.
You know, Sandy, we're going to talk about a lot of different things as always. And before we get into all of those things, Sandy, um, it finally looks like there's a crack. The stock market is starting to show signs of some weakening. Should we be concerned at all about that?
Well, we should always be concerned about everything in the economy. We've been on a bull run for a very long time, and everyone understands that it can't be perpetual. So everyone's always looking for the corner. When is this going to turn a corner? When do we have to worry? And people have been having that conversation for the last 6 years, probably. But we might be getting closer to the time when the planets are lining up for in a manner that might be a little more risky, particularly since we've undertaken to trifle with the world economy and with the world order in such a massive way over the past year that we've introduced a great deal more uncertainty into the world. And uncertainty is something that the financial community ultimately wants to hide from. So yeah, I would say that the circumstances today are riskier for those people who are investing in the stock market than it was 12 months ago or 18 months ago.
That dreaded word correction could be on the horizon, huh?
Well, we've probably almost gotten into the world of correction. Now the question is whether we actually get into something that's a bear market. Uh, but I don't know. The world financial market tends to fly to the United States when uncertainty in the world increases, even though we might be the ultimate provocateur, the one that's causing the uncertainty. We might actually, our stock market might, right at this point at least, be benefiting from the fact that money is flying towards safety and the dollar is currently the safest currency because of the circumstances.
So, Sandy, you and I want to talk today about what you referred to as long range plans of our government. And when I was talking a little earlier with you about that, it just harkened me back to when we first met in some conversations that you were talking about, we were having way back then. And you kept talking about long term strategy, long term planning that our government was not doing. You remember those conversations? I mean, long, long time ago.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think probably the first couple of shows we did, we
Yes.
talked about it. Um, yeah, one of the problems it happened to corporations. There used to be a great deal more long-range planning in the 50s and 60s, and then the people who ran corporations began to become very worried about the performance of their stock quarter to quarter and year to year because they began to be compensated. And maybe the intention was to draw the attention of management away from the very long term into something closer to a short term where people who were investors might benefit from purchasing stock and then selling it in a year, 2, 3, 4 years, the capacity to make money out of the stock market. And so we went from long range planning being the norm for corporations to long range planning being something that was only done periodically. And corporations became very interested in what profits they could announce each quarter. And the quarterly profits became very important to the stock market. Each quarterly report is an event, and it's an event that the stock market reacts to. And so people who run corporations who are worried about the value of their stock became very worried in the short term. What is our what's our business going to look like in the next quarter? What's it going to look like by year end? And people weren't necessarily spending a great deal of time looking at what their business would look like in 5 years or 10 years. Well, I think the same thing has happened in the election cycle uh, with the volatility that's caused by primary tests and the potential that money will be invested against incumbents. Incumbents in office have become very, very concerned about each election cycle. And each election cycle is a 2 year period. And so we don't have planning that seems to exceed, from a political standpoint, the next election cycle, the next 2 years. And in fact, it's frequently the next news cycle. Our current administration seems to be intent on dominating the daily news. Well, how do you do that? Well, you capture the daily news cycle. And the attention span of the public has shortened a great deal, as has the attention span of our politicians. So we end up with a knowledge that we have long-term problems. Everyone says, well, we've got a long-term Social Security solvency problem. We have a long-term national debt problem. We have a long-term problem with the design of our healthcare system. We have a long-term problem with education and the cost of education. And yet all of these long-term problems tend to get ignored. It's the proverbial kicking the can down the road while everyone watches the next news cycle, and the long term for everyone is now the next election cycle.
Sandy, I would ask you. Congress is every 2 years. Uh, the Senate is every 4 years. The president is every 4 years. How is it possible if they're on these cycles of 2 years, 4 years,
Six
that they
years for the
6 years,
Senate. Yeah.
excuse me, 6 years for the Senate,
Yeah.
that they can that 6 years I can see a little bit more. They can plan long term if some of them, caught in a 2 year cycle.
Well, that's the problem. And to control Congress, you have to control the House of Representatives. They have a 2 year cycle. The president tends to be a lame duck in his second 2 years, so they're very interested in as well. And I think the area today that I'm most concerned about in terms of this long-term planning, the way it has played out in our domestic affairs, particularly with Social Security and the national debt, but internationally, we've tended ever since World War II to be very in tune with near-term effects. We had the Vietnam War and the initial impetus into Vietnam. We were going to essentially, using a current presidential term, obliterate Vietnam and bring them to their knees. It was a lengthy war. We didn't bring them to their knees, and the long-term effect of Vietnam domestically was very troublesome. And we didn't achieve regime change. We didn't change the government of Vietnam. In fact, Vietnam unified under a communist regime. Now, the fact is, we're getting along with that communist regime very well today. But every war since Vietnam has involved a short-term objective, the shock and awe of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, we've had this instinct that we can bomb our way to a change in the world affairs that is going to be beneficial to the United States, and it hasn't worked even once. The long-term effect tends to redound against the interest of the United States. I mean, it started with our meddling in the Middle East with the coup in which we unseated Mossadegh, who was the democratically elected leader of Iran in 1953, and the British intelligence and the U.S. CIA staged a coup, installed the Shah of Iran. He ran a police state for 17 years, 16 years, 1953 to 1979, and um, and then or 26 years, I'm sorry. And then it collapsed. And what did we end up with? The Shah. I mean, the Ayatollah Khomeini replaced the Shah, and we went from a police state that was our client state to a autocratic state that was against the United States in all respects. And we could have expected that if we had really looked at the tea leaves and what it was we were doing with Iran and installing a person like the Shah. And we can just take that thread and go forward in time. You can look at what we did in Iraq. We unseated Saddam Hussein, left a vacuum, which Iran has filled with its Shia power structure. We did it in Afghanistan, left a vacuum. We went from Taliban to Taliban. Uh, in Venezuela, we didn't unseat the Maduro regime. We simply found a puppet in the regime who would abide by the United States interests with respect to natural resources. But what do we expect the long-term effects to be? And that's where I think we've run amok. We look at the short term, we announce our capacity to unload bombs and cause the obliteration, presumably or maybe, of the nuclear capability of Iran. But what have we done in the long term? And what will be the impact of this in the long term? And if we look at our historic lessons, we will decide that it's most likely to be very detrimental.
You know, Sandy, I would agree with you that clearly these escapades that we've gotten ourselves into, I think at the root of it is the fact that we have spent so much money on our military and continue to spend that money on our military. And so, you know, we're aggressive because we have this powerful military. But at the same time, in order for us to continue to build up that powerful military, we basically forgotten about the American people and the taxpayers and what their needs are, because we're going to sacrifice the needs of the American people and the taxpayers because there are people who've got these grandiose ideas about controlling the world. And so when you talk about long-term planning, who's there to say, hey, in the long-term planning, shouldn't the American people be at the front of the line on the long-term planning, i.e., Sandy, again, going back to healthcare and all those different things and job opportunities? Who's going to stand up? Yeah, I mean, you hear Democrats talking about it, you know, that the American people should somehow be moved to the front of the line when it comes to these kinds of things. But long-term planning has to start somewhere, Sandy. And if you've got a divide between the way this is viewed in a two-party system, in order to do the long-term planning, people have to be on the same page, don't they?
Well, it requires leadership. It requires people who can enunciate and speak to the future. It's in an earlier podcast, I've talked about how one of the problems with democracy is that it's the status quo that's represented in the state house. It's the status quo that's represented in Congress. It's the people with their current jobs. It's the businesses in their current configuration. It's all of those interests that are voted in the voting booth. And so yes, we need to re-examine and redesign our healthcare system, but 20% of our GDP is vested in the current healthcare system. And so it's not an easy thing to undertake and not an easy thing to change. It requires a great deal of, number one, careful analysis, and then two, lots of leadership and the ability to enunciate and to describe to us the problem, the vision, and the path to the vision, which is not something we are currently getting out of our political process. And we're also not getting it with respect to our international affairs. People can enunciate a problem. It's typically a very short-term problem. Sometimes it's a manufactured problem. And then the solution to it, they always say that if you have a hammer, the solution to the tool that you need in all cases is the hammer, and that's what you'll use. Well, that's kind of what we've got. We've got this military, it's a hammer, and I'm not sure that hammers are very good at getting rid of hornets' nests. You can you can break the nest up with with the hammer, but you can't kill all the hornets. And ultimately, they'll get you. And that's kind of what the strategy that's being employed right now is. We're using a hammer in Iran, and it turns out Iran is a hornet's nest, and their capacity to continue is not under our control. The president, I think, would like now to stop using the hammer and to declare victory. And I think the Hornets are saying, no, we're not done yet. We have more stinging to do. We want to make sure you don't come near the next nest.
You
And
know,
yeah,
Sandy, the problem with our discussion uh, from the perspective of everyday people, everyday Joes, is even though the things you are saying are spot on as far as long term planning for our country and what benefits the American people, there we don't have the power as the American citizens to force that to happen. So when Trump came into office this last time around, his big thing was cut government. Okay, government is too big. So he brought in Elon Musk. They cut a lot of jobs in government because they somehow led people to believe government was too fat and it was costing us too much money. And so let's get rid of most of these people in government because we don't need them. And so there are many people, citizens, who agreed, yeah, that's right. Let's get rid of that. Let's do that. But nothing changed for the American people, Sandy. It got worse.
well, I think it did change, and I think it changed for the worse, actually.
Yes,
Well, one of the things about long-term planning is that to the extent there's anybody in government who's participating in it, it tends to be the professional employees in government. So the State Department has long had a large group of professional people who are in the diplomatic service. And the diplomatic service is all about understanding the long-term situations, evaluating the consequences in the future of conduct today based on their understanding of the history. And we have an administration who decided they wanted to basically tear up what they called the deep state being all of these experienced people in government who they believe get in the way of rapid change. But one of the reasons they get in the way of rapid change is they understand the future maybe better than the people who are getting into government and wanting to change things dramatically. And I fear, particularly in the area of international affairs, that by losing all of the professionals, or many of the professionals in the State Department, we're losing our capacity to understand the consequences of our conduct in the long term. And it's the long term that matters. I mean, the fact is that there are other governments, the Chinese government for sure, probably the Russian government, but numbers of government who play the long game, and they're looking at the long-term results, understanding that it's the long-term trends and the long-term results that matter, not the current news cycle and not the current election cycle.
Sandy, this thing is so far reaching. Uh, the fact that there hasn't been any long term planning from our government to address what are really oncoming issues. We're not talking about just the issues of today that we're dealing with right now. We're talking about long term issues uh, that are going to manifest themselves in the next 5 to 10 years that, uh, you know, are really going to present some almost insurmountable problems for young generations who still have their whole lives ahead of them, Sandy. What we are creating right now creates a quagmire that will certainly damage the futures of the generations to come. Is it safe to say that?
Well, that's the thing that's surprising to me is that when corporations do long range planning, they're talking about possibilities, contingencies which might or might not occur. But what the United States is staring down the barrel of are things that not just might occur, but will occur if we stay on the current trajectory. So the current trajectory of our deficit spending is unsustainable. The current trajectory of our healthcare programs in terms of their cost as a percentage of GDP is not sustainable. And these things are things we know. And so, therefore, these are things that we need to embrace, we need to accept, we need to start solving for, because when you kick the can down the road on a problem that's going to occur in the future, you simply make that you remove options for dealing with that problem, and you also make it less likely that you will effectively deal with it. So, you know, we need leadership in this country, and we need leadership that's focused on the real issues facing America, and we need leadership that's capable of ignoring the special interests who are spending great deals of money in Washington to elect the people who will do their bidding and will deflect the attention of those people from the things that need to be done for the country at large, for the people of this country. So we have 20% of the economy vested in the current healthcare system who are spending their money to try and make sure that the current healthcare system doesn't get turned on its head by some future plan and is continued in a manner which benefits those with the vested interest. The same is true of the defense industry and how they're dealing with our nation. And the same is true with the energy industry. And you can see the results of this by the policies that we undertake or the policies that we don't undertake as the result of these clearly foreseeable issues for which we are generally burying our head in the sand.
You know, Sandy, several years ago, uh, there was conversation about Social Security, and it was the big elephant in the room. And what are we going to do with Social Security? It's running out. It's going to be this. They're not talking about Social Security anymore, Sandy. The problem didn't go away, did it?
No.
Okay, so
And no, the problem didn't go away, and the problem of healthcare costs hasn't gone away, and the problem of that's embedded in our education system and its costs hasn't gone away. We looked at and talked about for a while student debt
yes.
as this major issue. Well, that was a symptom. That wasn't the issue. That was the symptom of the issue, which was we have a education system which is not properly financed and is too expensive. But uh, the issue really becomes one of how do we get our focus back to what it should be focused upon. This idea of America first has a seductive quality to it. It sounds like what we're going to focus on is the problems of Americans and the problems Americans face, but it hasn't translated to that at all. It's translated to the institution of the American supreme power coming first, apparently, which means we try to exercise imperial powers associated with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Iran. The notion that we can essentially topple regimes or at least create puppet regimes. We're saying the quiet part out loud with respect to our international affairs. And it seems that we've decided currently, in the near term at least, to embrace it enthusiastically. And all of those kinds of policies have been the ones which, when you take historical perspective on it, have been extremely detrimental to the United States and to the world order in the long run.
So Sandy, these issues that we're talking about, our forefathers had to deal with issues as this nation uh, was began and its development over those centuries, it, it wasn't always smooth sailing. The politicians had to deal with tough issues. Is it that we can't say that these issues are insurmountable because those who came before us were able to address the tough issues that they had to deal with in their day? So why is it different?
Well,
Okay.
the tough issues, we haven't tended to deal with the tough issues until we get punched in the nose with them. So, the depression of 1930 was the come to Jesus moment when we dealt with a whole bunch of issues, the order of our banking system and how it operated, our financial system and disclosures associated with it, the safety of our workers, the health of our workers. So, we got punched in the nose with the Depression, woke up and dealt with a bunch of issues. World War II was another punch in the nose, and it caused us to create some awareness. And then we've had a period of long, kind of smooth sailing. Vietnam was a bit of a punch in the nose. We had the deep recession of 2008, another punch in the nose. Each one of those things has caused us to react to problems which were probably incipient, meaning latent. They were there, but we weren't dealing with them until they became untenable, until they stuck their head up in such a way that we couldn't ignore them. So I would say that's been the path of America all the way along. We ignored the latent problems that led to our Civil War until we had a Civil War. We ignored the latent problems associated with Jim Crow and continued racism until the 1960s, until that sort of burst onto the scene. And we continue to have a number of these latent problems, and we would do far better to deal with them while they remain latent and not wait until they get up on their toes and punch us in the nose.
Sandy, if I'm following you, and I know I am, this is at some point we are going to be forced to deal with this and address it. But we're talking about four or five different major issues that may not manifest themselves at the same time all at once. We know, as you stated, that these are major issues. Shouldn't we be trying to knock them off one at a time right now?
Well, we should. And unfortunately, our political system has become much more distracted. And also, we've lost some guardrails. I mean, we created a bunch of guardrails for our economy after the Depression. But one of the guardrails that we had up until 1971 was the relationship of the dollar to gold. And it kind of restricted our capacity to use the Keynesian economics of deficit expenditures and abuse it. Okay, we were using Keynesian deficits basically to react to the things that required reaction, recessions. We were using it as a fiscal tool. And yes, we didn't have balanced budgets at all regularly, but we did not have massive deficits, and we particularly did not have massive deficits at times when our economy was doing well. Well, ever since we got off of the gold standard, there's been no flywheel restriction on our capacity to essentially increase the dollars in circulation through deficit expenditures. And ever since we went to guns and butter as a policy during Vietnam, where we weren't increasing taxes to support the war efforts and its expenses, we've used guns and butter ever since. We have not raised taxes during times of war. In fact, during the period of the first decade of this century, when we were spending trillions of dollars in warfare, we reduced taxes, and we've reduced taxes again more recently. At times when our economy continues to do swimmingly well, but it increases our deficits, so that currently we have an economy that our president boasts about, but we're running deficits at a record level. And so this is a different situation, and unfortunately, the fundamentals associated with the dollar potentially, the world losing confidence in the dollar is a very fundamental problem, more fundamental even than these fundamental issues I was describing earlier, which were primarily social issues.
So, Sandy, which is it? I hear people say, and I've kind of heard people say this for the last, I don't know, 8 years or more. The deficit really doesn't matter. Okay, I've heard this over and over again. Why are we focusing on the deficit? It really doesn't matter. But
Well,
then I hear, I'm listening to you, and clearly a $40 trillion budget deficit has to matter because we owe that to somebody, right? I mean,
well, the cost and the cost of servicing the $40 trillion debt
yeah, trillion, right?
has come to be $1 trillion a year, which makes it the largest budget item in the budget, which right off the top of your head you can see is a potentially fundamental problem. No, the deficit doesn't matter if it's a small percentage of the GDP, of a small percentage of our annual economy. It doesn't matter if the total debt is small in relationship to the capacity to service it. So, our economy can grow into a $40 trillion deficit and be comfortable with it. But the problem is if the deficit increases at a rate faster than our economy is growing, then we are putting an increasing debt overhang onto each dollar that is involved in our economy. And that's what we've been doing for the last couple of decades, is increasing the deficit annually and the federal debt as a percentage of our total economy. And that's where you get into a problem. If that percentage relationship becomes too large, and even the most liberal of the Keynesian economists would agree that that relationship does matter.
So a couple decades ago, Bill Clinton produced a balanced budget
He's
and
produced surpluses.
surpluses, right? And so in this short window, a couple decades, we've gone from surpluses to now eventually $40 trillion in debt. I will say to you, you talked about the $1 trillion of interest that we have to pay on that. And in the face of tremendous tax cuts that have occurred in that period, Sandy, isn't it safe to say that $1 trillion of interest that we are paying comes out of what could be used to address the other problems that our nation is facing?
Well, sure, of course. I mean, dollars are dollars, and if our dollars are finite, which I maintain they are, our politicians don't behave as if our dollars are finite. We have the current administration coming forward and simply asking Congress to come up with 200 to 250 billion dollars to support the war effort that's currently ongoing. They aren't talking about increasing taxes to generate that 250 billion. They're simply talking about increasing the deficit by that 250. And that's a massive number. That's an annual number. And so yeah, dollars are dollars, it turns out. And when we do a triage of where we need to be spending dollars, we understand that we don't want to be spending a significant percentage of our dollars simply paying for the debt that we've already incurred in the past, servicing that debt, which is both interest and paying back principal. But this problem has, and I would guess, a liberally biased economist, but I've come to the point where it's clear that Washington needs to get a grip, and this grip needs to take on the discipline of evaluating the problems we have as we move into the future, addressing those problems in the proper rank order of those problems. And I'm afraid that we've elevated international affairs to a far too high level. And we've decided that we can become hysterical about issues like Iran obtaining nuclear weapons when we've got numbers of countries in the world with nuclear weapons, some of them quite unstable, Pakistan being one of them. And we need to develop a better understanding of how we're going to deal with the rest of the world in a manner which will stabilize the world in the context of numbers of powers having nuclear weapons, because it's not going to be realistic. We're not going to have a nuclear weapon ban, not very soon at least. Um, and we've had agreements in the past. We had an agreement that was torn up by the current administration with respect to Iran nuclear weaponry, which was working, I believe. It was working in terms of the international inspection process that was ongoing. And when we have a 15-point plan now being offered to solve this so-called Iranian problem, the solution to the nuclear weapon ban is international inspections, something we already had. So I think we need to get very realistic and very steely eyed about evaluating the problems that we have as Americans and as a US government and addressing them in the right rank order. And I think we've got the rank order very distorted, number one. And number two, we've got to get disciplined to address them.
So, Sandy, we began this conversation talking about the lack of long-term planning of our nation, and you touched on a couple things that I want to really come back to. But right now, we got to take a really quick break and hear from our sponsor, uh, the ACLU, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to what's going on with Earl Ingram and my guest and colleague and co-host, none other than Mr. Sandy Williams. You know, if and I'll just leave it at that. Sandy is a well-learned and well-traveled uh, guy who certainly is more than anything else an economist, an attorney, and a whole lot of other things. And on top of all those things, he's a great friend. And I'm so excited and happy to always bring Sandy before you. But Sandy, before we took that short break, you talked about a couple things that, um, made me think. As every time I hear you speak, you make me think. Um, we talked about the fact that we have made a decision, a determination that a nation can't have nuclear weapons. And so when we make, okay, he can't hear me. All right. Can you hear me now, Sandy?
Yes.
Okay. We have made a determination that some nation can't have nuclear weapons. And we have taken it upon ourselves as the arbiters of the world to determine who can and who cannot have nuclear weapons. We have decided to go to war over that. So let's say there's another nation, excuse me, as there will be, who will decide that they want to have a nuclear weapon. Are we going to do the exact same thing? If this if
Well, I
this is
think the world.
policy now, if this is now policy of the
Mhm.
United States, and if you listen to our president and others who have made this determining factor, they can't have nuclear weapons. We're going to go to war, and all of these things. What about the next nation?
Well, there's a couple of problems with this current situation. Number one, we're teaching every nation a lesson that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you're subject to being attacked by us with impunity. If you do have a nuclear weapon, we've got to be far more careful about whether we, as an international power, will take you on. So that's a lesson learned by everybody watching the current situation, which should steer some of them in the direction of saying, yeah, we need this insurance policy because we don't want to be subject to the whims of the great powers. Number two, uh, it's not that difficult. The technology for creating a nuclear weapon requires certain equipment, but the fundamentals associated with how to do it, the know-how is basically probably available on the internet. And so it's not easy to to eliminate the know-how associated with the capability of creating a nuclear weapon. Number three, there are numbers of countries in the world who have nuclear weapons who might see fit to sell them. There's been some talk, at least at the conspirational level, but I think it's a little firmer than that, suggesting that a Mideastern country, maybe the UAE, has acquired a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. So the ability to fence out all of the world from its capacity to hold nuclear weapons or such weapons of mass destruction is a difficult path to pursue. Number one, and number two, the way we have pursued it has probably increased the premium associated with obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Sandy, you've repeated Washington needs to get a grip. They need to get a grip. They need to get a grip. And when I hear you say that, I'm like, who's going to make them get a grip? Uh, you know, as long as they are in the positions that they're in, they've finally kind of come to the realization that we need to be paying the people who are at the airports who, after 30 some odd, 40 days almost, you would think that, hey, the government and those in government would say, hey, we got to make sure those people are getting paid. Those people are representing our government. They have very important jobs that our nation needs. And so we can't be dallying around with making sure they get paid. But what do? 40 days and counting.
Well,
These are just average Joes, Sandy, who do a great, important job for our nation, and we can't even get this to be worked out.
well, these periodic situations that involve potential government shutdowns, whether it be authorizing an increase in the debt ceiling, whether it be the annual appropriations, all of these are symptoms of our incapacity to plan and to plan for the future, even the near-term future, in a manner that results in the smooth operation. If a corporation was unfunded for 6 months, they'd be in what's called Chapter 11. They'd have to go and figure out a way to get their creditors to stand still for a while they reorganized. So, I think that I'm not saying that government needs to be run as a business, but it needs to be run in a more business-like fashion. And part of that is analyzing the near-term future, the long-term future, the issues being faced near-term and long-term, and the path towards the desired future, which gets you through the maze of issues that you expect to face.
Sandy, isn't that what was said before they brought Donald Trump in? We need a businessman. Uh, the government needs to be run like a business, so let's get a businessman.
Well, we should have gotten a businessman then. We shouldn't have gotten someone whose business instincts bankrupted 6 businesses, whose business instincts started and failed a long list of Trump-denominated steaks, martinis, whatever. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I do think we need to have people who roll up their sleeves and address issues in a business-like manner. But the unfortunate thing is, uh, we just hired someone who claimed to be a business person without any evidence to support it. And we've ended up now having a government which is making lots of claims without support as well.
Sandy, I said it tongue in cheek. I agree with you that at the way our government is being run now is not sustainable long term. When you look at just all the things that we're faced with and what we're dealing with, um, long term, it's a recipe for failure. And so I don't know, if people will accept the next time a business guy coming in because they're going to look at this guy and say, see, we tried that. right? And it didn't work. But I concur with you that there has to be people who see beyond today and just can't live for today. We tell the American people not to live just for today, to plan for tomorrow, and then yet we don't do that ourselves.
Yeah, we've handed retirement in large part to the people, the 401k concept, but I don't think we've really set them up for success in the ways that they could be based on how we designed it. And we've decided that it's better to take things out of the hands of government, mainly because government has been operated in such a manner over the past 30, 40, 50 years that it's probably not very trustworthy to handle things for the long term. And we need to get back to insisting that our government be the place where the long term is evaluated and the long term is dealt with through a process that creates a greater probability of long term success. Because as stewards for the future, we ought to be behaving in that fashion and be concentrated on the future. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that most politicians don't even look past the windshield. They're looking in the rearview mirror and they're looking to their left and to their right to see whether they're beating the car next to them, but they haven't figured out where these cars are driving.
Sandy, you're a guy who worked in government as well as business, and so you certainly see it from both aspects and both ends of it. But we pointed out a lot of the issues that we're faced with in this nation, both today and long term. But solutions, Sandy, is is what's in order. And there aren't quick solutions to this, are there?
Not quick solutions, but there are solutions that need to be worked on, that need to be evaluated, and there are directions that we could be headed that would be vectoring the country in a better direction, so that our trajectory was more sustainable, more likely to achieve success. When you're steering a large craft across the ocean, you don't make quick turns. You have a focus on a target that's well out into the future, well out into the direction you're going, and you aim for that. And I'm afraid that's what we're not doing, is we don't have targets that are out in the future that we're aiming ourselves at in the direction of, and making sure that our trajectory is going to bring us closer to that point. And so it's not rocket science. It's really just a question of people being willing to address something more than the seductive issue of today, the one that's going to grab the news cycle tomorrow. And it's one that needs to look at long-term implications of conduct today. And we've just demonstrably been bad at it. We've been bad at it from the standpoint of international affairs. I think the last time we did something that had a long horizon that was aimed at benefiting ourselves and the world was probably the Marshall Plan after World War II. And since then, we've sort of failed in most respects. We did build a world order. We became a part of that world order where we were viewed as a soft and beneficial ally, and that was all beneficial in the long run. The last year and a half we've spent destroying that, and have walked away from almost all the soft power that the United States had, which was based on goodwill. And we're now left with the power the United States have that's based on the number of arrows in its quiver.
So, Sandy, you point things out. There clearly are minds in this country that can fix the issues that we're dealing with. Because I hear them on many programs. I read things about people who have the right ideas, the right answers. So there are people in this country who are capable of sitting down and repairing and fixing the issues that we are dealing with, Sandy. But, you know, America First, which sounded romantic and sounded like, okay, we're going to address the issues that we are faced with, i.e., Social Security, Medicare, and all those things. And so we had a guy who said America First, and there were people in this. You can't hear. Okay, he can't hear.
Yeah, we got it now.
Okay, and so America First, Sandy. You know, it sounded romantic. America First. We're going to make sure that the American people. We're going to take care of you, and so there are people in this nation, Sandy, who have certainly the intellect, the understanding of the issues that we are dealing with, that they can repair the issues we're talking about. But so America First came in and people started, America First, that sounds great. It's going to address the issues I'm dealing with, my pain. But Sandy, it didn't be, we
Well,
didn't get to America First.
no, I mean, I think if we were really going to be serious about this, we'd reach out to the likes of Elon Musk and Bezos and the people who are sitting on uh, hundreds of billions of dollars. And instead of financing Doge, which was designed to essentially tear government down and make it as small as possible, we'd ask those people to finance a long-range planning process for the United States that would enlist the people of the country, as well as the politicians of the country, as well as the brains in the country, to evaluate, consider, and figure out a sort of a long-range strategic plan for the country, or maybe alternative long-range strategic plans, which could then become the subject of political debate, political discussion, and political action, and we could start measuring our progress to the future. And maybe that idea could be sustained but who knows? We need to do something, and it needs to be the project of some people with leadership capacity and the capacity to demand attention, and we need to use it constructively. And so, if I think we started out this discussion talking about that, and that's kind of the where I've come to in terms of believing that there might be a solution, but it needs to be an augmentation and a change to the current political process, because our current political process has developed far shorter planning horizons, a lack of attention to the future, and too much attention to special interests and not to the interests of the people at large.
So special interest, Sandy, um, which is really part of what's at the root of why we are where we are now. Special interests, which says my interests come before what's in the best interest of the masses of the American people. That's a tough one to get over, because special interest means, Sandy, money. And so, if I don't have any money and the people who have the money have the ear of our elected officials, Sandy, I don't know how we overcome that.
Well, the Citizens United was a change, a
And we're
sea
suffering
change,
from that now.
a sea change in the way money flowed into politics and the way it has affected politics. It was an accentuating a trend which was clearly occurring. That's why I say it takes leadership. It takes people who need to stand up swim against the current that is created by that sort of flow of money and politics, swim against that flow, and try and grab the attention of the public to move us in a better direction, and a more long-term viable, tenable, attainable direction.
So, Sandy, how do in listen, with all of your wisdom and all the different things that you have done in your life and the places you've been, this is really one that we don't know how it ends when it comes to money in politics. We know that it has to end, right? in order for there to be some correction of the things that impact and affect the lives of the American people, that's got to be taken on. That's another one of those issues that has to be taken on,
Well,
right?
yeah, we can just hope that it gets taken on before we get punched in the nose. Uh, they always say everyone's got a plan until they get
Yeah,
punched in the nose.
yeah.
But we need to we need to have a plan so that we don't get punched in the nose, and so that we can move along without having to get hit upside the head so hard, like we did with the Depression, like we did with World War II, like we have in a number of other circumstances, like we did with the stagflation in the late '70s, like we did after the recession in 2008. So yeah, and I don't know exactly how we grab attention in that respect and convert it to that kind of constructive process, but it's going to become increasingly important, or it doesn't take a genius to predict that we will get punched in the nose.
So, Sandy, is it that you and I are just a couple graybeards who have lived our lives and fortunate to live at a time of that the nation was ripe and was growing, and whatever we wanted, whatever we envisioned, we could make happen. We were certainly controlling the world, so to speak, during our lifetimes, and yet we see now the coming to grips with all of those things that we were able to benefit from. And don't we now, as in the twilights of our lives and our in careers, to see all of this before us, and I just don't think it's young people who can take this on, right? I mean, they're smart, they're brilliant, but the impact of what we are talking about here, Sandy, young people have a right to be planning their futures. The future shouldn't include, you know, $75 trillion in debt, right?
Well, there's unfortunately there's no easy process for a nation declaring bankruptcy and getting rid of its debts. So it's a situation. The expression people use, "It is what it is." Well, it is what it is, and it's going to be what it's going to be. But we need to try and figure out what it's going to be, and we try to make what it's going to be tenable and something that's sustainable. And that can be done. We aren't at the point of no return. We're just at a dramatic point where we need to get our attention so that we don't get to the point of no return. And I don't know where that point is, but if we continue to behave as we are behaving today, that point of no return is getting closer and closer to us. And
So,
so, that's the concern I have.
so Sandy, can't we start with coming to a realization in this war that we are faced with, that we're dealing with right now, that continuing to build all these new beautiful weapons. I saw the president last week. He had a mock-up of the um, A1 bomber. What is it? A2A? I don't know what it's called now. Our stealth bombers that we are using. They had a mock-up of that on his desk.
B-2 bomber.
B-2 bombers. Right. Thank you. B-2 bombers. And he was showing this thing like a kid with a toy, and he was saying, "Look at how beautiful this is. Oh, it's one of the most beautiful things in the world, and it does a lot of damage, but it's really beautiful." And instead of being enamored with that stuff and all the costs associated with it, and we've seen in this war, and we've seen in the war with Ukraine and Russia, and we just have our beautiful Gerald Ford aircraft carrier. It's got to go out and be overhauled for a whole year. So and yet we're on the drawing board, more aircraft carriers, more of the, Sandy, we can't afford to do those things anymore.
Well, like I said earlier, if when you've got a hammer and you're good at using a hammer, then that's the only tool you can think about. And one of the things that is coming out of this war is a demonstration that the awesome shock and awe power of the American military is very capable of obliterating targets, but it's not very good at causing the changes in the socioeconomic circumstances that is the target of the ultimate target of the activity. So, we've obliterated things that are apparently strategic targets in Iran, but we have not limited Iran's capacity as the hornets and the hornet nest to sting and to create the defensive situation that basically is causing our country to say, hey, well, now we need to get to the bargaining table because we've used the tools we can use, and now we can see that we're standing in the face of social and economic damage in the Mideast that we'd like to stop. But you can't always you can't call the hornets in once you've released them from the nest. So yeah, but I think it's clear that any country, any business tends to be blinded by the things that it does well, and it keeps it from understanding what other things it might do, which might be better or more important. And so, again, it's a question of understanding the circumstances, understanding the issues, understanding the problems, and figuring out the best path towards solving them. And in our case, I think we're going to find out that it isn't always or isn't often the use of that hammer.
Sandy, as always, just a great conversation. You always make me think, and hopefully those in the listening audience of this podcast will do likewise. Always great talking to you, my friend.
Yep, good talking to you.
Yeah, we
See,
will
see you
talk
next time.
soon.
Yep.
All right. Hey, go Bucks.
Yeah.
I,
I'm not holding my breath.
I thought I'd add a little sense of humor
Yeah.
in the end. All right. Thank you very much, Sandy. Always good
See ya.
talking to you. Thanks to our sponsor, the American with Civil Liberties Union. And we'll be back the next time. That's a wrap for what's going on with Earl Ingram. See you next time.